Good evening. My name is Keith Marzullo, and I'm the Dean of the College of Information Studies here at the University of Maryland. And it's my great honor and pleasure to introduce or to welcome you to the Anne Scott MacLeod Lecture Series. This lecture series was established in 1999. I have some more people coming in. Great. Hello. And we're starting late, just so you know. And it started in 1999. We've been holding about every 2 years, which means in my time I've been here, I've seen 3 of them. And each one I've just found a delight. I've learned so much from each of them. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing from Meg Medina. I want to tell you a little bit about Anne, though, just so you know how we got to this place. Anne Scott MacLeod, she was one of the early faculty members here at the college, then the School of Library and Information Services. I looked and she was on the 1971 roster, which is the college started in 1965. So she is one of our first faculty members. She also got her MLS from us, and then she got her PhD in history. And her dissertation history was A Moral Tale, Children's Fiction and American Culture, 1820 to 1860. So you can see where she was going. She was an expert in children's literature. Her later book, published just 30 years ago, was called American Childhood Essays on Children's Literature in the 19th and 20th Centuries. I just ordered a copy. I haven't read it yet. The essays in this book range from the 1990s situation, the politicized marketplace for children's books at that time, to the reestablishment and reconfiguration of the family as represented in children's fiction, and to the ways that literature challenges the idealization of children's society. These are all things we're talking about today, and this book was 30 years ago. So I'm delighted to welcome you here. Let me hand this over to Katrina Fenlon. She is the co-director of the faculty director of the MLIS program. Katrina.
Thank you, Keith, and thank you all so much for being here this evening. Before we begin, I'll take a moment to reflect on the place where we are gathered today using the University of Maryland's land acknowledgement, which was developed by a group of students, faculty, and staff who worked closely with Native and Indigenous elders. Every community owes its existence and strength to the generations before them around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy into making the history that led to this moment. Truth and acknowledgement are critical in building mutual respect and connections across all barriers of heritage and difference. So we acknowledge the truth that is often buried. We are on the ancestral land of the Piscataway people, who are the ancestral stewards of this sacred land. It is their historical responsibility to advocate for the four-legged, the winged, those that crawl, and those that swim. They remind us that clean air and pristine waterways are essential to all life. This land acknowledgement is a vocal reminder for each of us as two-leggeds to ensure our physical environment is in better condition than what we inherited for the health and prosperity of future generations. Today, our discussion is in fact all about the health and thriving of future generations. I'm Katrina Fenlon. I'm an assistant professor in the College of Information Studies and the co-director of our master's program in Library and Information Science, along with Ryan O'Grady, who's here in the room with us. I am beyond thrilled to introduce, what amazing timing, to introduce a pair of speakers today whose brilliant creative works, wonderful, yes, round of applause for Allister's incredible timing. To introduce an actual pair of wonderful speakers whose brilliant creative works, tireless advocacy, and extensive accolades have made them already familiar by name to many of you. So I'll introduce you each and get you set up, Allister, with a water and some speaking notes. So Meg Medina is the current National Ambassador for Young People's Literature. This is a position that was originally established in 2008 to raise national awareness of the importance of young people's literature as it relates to lifelong literacy and education and the development and betterment of the lives of young people. The selection of the National Ambassador is made by the Librarian of Congress based on recommendations from field experts and an independent committee of educators, librarians, booksellers, and children's literature specialists. Meg Medina is the author of the Newbery Medal-winning book, Mercy Suarez Changes Gears, which was also a 2018 Kirkus Prize finalist. She has authored several other young adult novels, Yaqui Delgado Wants to Kick Your Ass, which won the 2014 Pura Belpré Author Award, and Burn Baby Burn, which was longlisted for the National Book Award. She's authored picture books, Evelyn Del Rey is Moving Away, which was Jumpstart's 2020 Read for the Record selection, Mango, Abuela, and Me, illustrated by Angela Dominguez, which was a Pura Belpré Author Award honor book, and Tia Isa Wants a Car, which won the Ezra Jack Keats New Writer Award. Meg Medina is the daughter of Cuban immigrants, grew up in Queens, New York, and she now lives in Richmond, Virginia. Several of the books that I mentioned are available for purchase at our reception following this event, and Meg will grace us with a little book signing at the same time. Meg will also introduce her forthcoming book towards the end of the talk. We're also honored to host Allister Chang as Meg's discussant today to lead us in conversation. Allister is the Ward 2 member of the DC State Board of Education and an advisory board member of the Library of Congress Literacy Awards. Allister was previously a Robert Bosch Stiftung Fellow at the Global Public Policy Institute, a visiting researcher at UNESCO's Institute for Lifelong Learning, and the executive director of Libraries Without Borders. He's been on the International Literacy Association's 30 Under 30 list and holds a master's in public policy from the Harvard Kennedy School. Wow, we couldn't be more excited for this conversation. Thanks so much to you all for joining us, both in the room and online for this event, and for your patience in getting it started. And I'm now happy to hand it off to Allister and Meg.
Great.
Hi.
Hello, Meg. Great to see you.
How
Hello,
is that
everybody.
traffic?
I am very happy, very happy to be here in this room with you all and no longer on New York Avenue trying to get out of DC. And thank you for your patience. Yeah. Should we pass this back and forth? Okay.
Can you hear us okay without a mic?
Do you want? Guess what?
It's
You have
for
a
the
catch box.
folks
Oh,
online.
wait, I have a matchbox.
Matches your outfit.
Oh, good. I have this and I'm not afraid to throw it, so just so you know. Look alive, people. So my goodness, I'm so excited that you and I are going to be in conversation. I think, you know, I met Allister. I had the pleasure of serving with Allister on the Library of Congress's Literacy Awards Committee. And we had so many opportunities to really have deep conversations about literacy, about children, about books. And so when this opportunity came up, you seemed like the perfect person. So thank you for going through all that traffic.
I am honored
this
to be
evening.
here.
Okay.
So we have talked about many of these themes, and I'm also excited to dig deeper into them with you. One of the things that, of course, we have discussed previously, and that I'd love to share with this group with us tonight is the importance of authentic voices in children's books and the impact of reading outside of one's own experiences. And since I am asking the questions tonight, I'll sprinkle in a few anecdotes from my side as well. I'm really excited to share that in DC, where I get to serve on the State Board of Ed, we've recently revised our social studies standards for the first time since 2006, with the analogy of making sure that our students in DC have both windows to look outside and see beyond their own experiences, as well as mirrors, right, to be able to see the curriculum reflect their own identities and experiences as well. Would love to hear how this theme is.
Yeah, so that's been a running conversation for me across the nation, and especially in this role as ambassador. So So I'm going to say two things. The first is that I'm the first Latina ambassador, right? So that is comes with, that's an exciting thing, but it comes with a built-in problem, right? Because I'm the ambassador for all children, Latino and non-Latino, like I'm the ambassador, I'm the book friend of every child in America. And I also feel like I'm in that windows and mirror role as a human being, right? Because I also am very aware that Latino children and Latino families are looking to me to represent them, to offer the country a new way of thinking about Latino families and literacy in Latino families and so on. So in some corners of the country, that's a harder conversation. In some places, the notion of focusing a book with clear cultural content or heavy cultural content is almost construed as dangerous, as foreign, as a problem, as sometimes un-American. And so the conversation has been that your story and mine and all of your stories, that is what the American story is, right? All of them together. So I try to book talk with the kids, books that reflect their experience and that are wildly outside their experience. And I talk about the books not leading with the cultural content, but leading with what the story is. This adventure story about these two kids who blah, blah, blah. This love story about, and I book talk it that way. The universal and the specific somehow, trying to bridge those. But you know, I say this to my husband Javier all the time. Watching the needle move on books by and about children of color and from marginalized communities is like watching the needle on my scale. Like when I get on this, it's stubborn. You know, it doesn't want to move the way I want it to move. It is getting better. There are many more Latino authors, for example, publishing today than when I started in 2008. When I started in 2008, I could probably name the dozen people, Margarita Engel, like Pam Munoz Ryan. There was a handful of us that we could reliably pull. Now there's, you know, a few hundred, right? And I don't know them, and that's exciting. You know.
If I may go off script on that,
yes,
I'd love to hear how you came to find that voice of yours and this approach, right, of telling a universal story within a cultural context.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I have to tell a Latino story because I'm Latina. These are the only eyeballs I have. I move through the world as this person with this background. So I interact with the world based on my experiences, just the same way all of you do. And so what I find though, what I started to find is that it didn't matter if the character's name was Tia Isa, it didn't matter if I was talking about frijoles con arroz blanco, or it didn't matter. Ultimately, if I was writing the characters really honestly and writing people, not stereotypes, not flat characters, but actual people and actual situations and longings that we have in childhood, if I wrote those really honestly, it became universal. It didn't matter. And I find that in my own reading. Do you find that? Like, I love to read completely outside my culture and find myself saying, yes, that's exactly it. You know, I feel that. So that's it.
I certainly have a Tia who also wants a car. So,
Yes.
yeah. One of the things that you have been such a strong voice on is the immigrant, the first generation experience as, and I love this, right, a potentially unifying narrative
Yeah.
for our country. And I'd love to hear more about how you've been sharing that narrative, how you've come to that narrative, what reactions you get when you share that narrative, as you have been in this role and been all over our country, right?
Yeah.
And speaking with audiences like this across the US.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Are you first generation?
I am.
I am too.
Mhm.
And so that's important to share when I go to all different places. Like I arrived, my family did not speak English well. You know, I had many of the obstacles, financial obstacles, to education, to opportunities, to all of those things, you know, that are typical, that are signature of recent arrivals. I share that. I share that openly, for both the kids who are first generation, who are actively translating their lives for their parents every single moment. You know, not just the words, the feeling of the country, what's in, what's allowed, what they need to do, how they want to stretch in ways that frighten their parents sometimes, or are in direct conflict with what the parents have known to be, you know, the right thing. So I share it for them, but I also share for kids whose families have been here forever, right? And who consider themselves quote unquote American, right? To challenge that notion of what is foreign and what is dangerous, what is not us. And it often works, I think. I think it, just being an example, I think, and talking with them honestly, helps break down barriers, I think. And we have this mythology in that it's not really, all right, let's not call it a mythology. Let's call it aspirational. We have this aspirational, we are a country of immigrants. We love our immigrants. We have built this country with immigrants. We're great. And yes, and, right? We also have some troubling habits, right? We've had some troubling history. And so I feel like that conversation is I try to grab onto this notion of, yes, the power that we have is in all of our stories, in the fact that we are coming from so many places in the world to make this place, this unique combination of views, of freedoms, of opportunities, et cetera. So I try to challenge the increasingly worrisome notion of immigrant as foreign, dangerous and foreign, destabilizing, right? Like I try to challenge that by reinforcing the notion of, no, the more of us, the more stories of us, the more we respect our individual stories, we're going to find how we connect. That is how I try to do it.
And it's exactly that action, right, of finding the connections
Yes.
between that I find so inspiring in your texts.
Thank you.
And it certainly resonates what you just said around needing to not only translate for families, right, but as I was sitting through traffic on my drive over, I called my parents, and they immigrated to DC from Taipei. My dad didn't get to go through much schooling, so he actually does not read. And if you've read any of Marianne Wolf's books or any of the neuroscience on reading, it's very hard to build those neural pathways as an adult. And so one of the reasons why I have always worked in literacy is because I've seen how hard it is for my father to navigate the world. And you know, until recently, I always thought that was the purpose of reading, right? To be able to equip each of us with the capacities to be able to navigate the world around us. And more recently, I actually have been thinking more in terms of what you've just described as reading as not only about being able to know which exit to take off the highway,
Yeah.
but also relational, actually. Right?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many levels. And so at the library, I do office hours 4 times a year. They're very fun. The families come, they sign up by lottery, and they come, and the kids come with like these bags of books, and their job is to come and tell me what they're reading, what they like about how they're being taught reading, something they really want me to know so that I could tell their teacher, like not to do anymore, like those kinds of things. And they bring their parents. They have to come with parents. Recently, I had a family, a mom and her 2 daughters from El Salvador. And a friend of theirs or a representative from a literacy organization that knew them. That's who came as the family unit. And the mom, we did this office visit bilingually. We did it in Spanish and English. The girls were more comfortable speaking in English, the mom in Spanish. And the mom said the most incredible thing to me. It makes me think of your father right here. She said, my parents did not read at all. They were illiterate. I read enough to know what to do. And her daughters, one was a complete nonfiction dynamo. She brought out books about things that were so fascinating, and she wants to be a scientist. And the little one was all about fiction, and it was amazing. And there it was, in just a generation or two, this enormous change, as with your dad and you. So the power is just, it's an amazing thing. The doors that it opens, but also as you say, the doors that it opens for opportunity, all of those things, and the connections. Yeah.
The action around how we build those connections is top of mind again, right? Because as I was coming over, I was saying to my parents, they asked, what am I doing? And I said,
I'm in traffic.
Exactly. And I can't wait to have this conversation. And I realized that a lot of actually the rest of the story, the details, neither of my parents have the vocabulary actually to fully understand the content, right, of this discussion.
Yeah.
And it frustrated in traffic, but actually felt challenged, right, by the task then of how do I build the connection when we don't have the shared vocabulary, right? And I think there is something that is so powerful about the ways in which you are able to tell those stories, right? So that even for folks who don't have the shared vocabulary, the feeling is there, right? And I think the immigrant story is one way that you are able to build those bridges. And another, of course, is through the story and voices of girls, right? And I'd love to hear more about how does that shape the work and
Yes.
how you approach the stories?
The men were dead. Let's start there. The men in my life were gone, right? My mother and father divorced right before my birth. My mother's brother was still in Cuba. My grandfather's died when I was very young. I was 4 or 5, which people are always surprised about because of Merci Suarez, and I write Lolo and this big grandfather story. So I was raised by women, frightened immigrant, poor women in New York City in 1970, right in the 70s, which was a scary place. It was a really happening place. I would say my aunts and my mother would not have called themselves feminists for certain. They wouldn't have thought themselves as strong women, and yet they had to be. If something broke, they had to figure out how to fix it with the screwdriver they bought at Woolworths, right? They had to figure things out. They had to figure out this country. They had to figure out how to raise girls, the whole thing. And still with very machista ideology that was deeply inside them. Like my mother wanted so much for me to find a wonderful man and be married and be happy. Like that for her felt like would be a wonderful end for me. So it was, I'm always interested in women's strength, in how girls form identity, how immigrant girls have to challenge ideas about identity, right? And what it is to be feminine, what it is to be strong, what it is to be successful, like all of those things. And so I always default that way in my books, I think, because I know those characters best. And I try to draw them really with all of their imperfections and their doubts and their missteps, just to get them right, you know, and their neuroses. I love neurotic characters. They're the most fun, you know.
And so relatable, yes.
Yeah, well, because we're all neurotic, right? Yeah, yeah. I think so. It's in the flaws. It's in the flaws that we can take a deep breath, just like release ourselves with the character when they really mess it up. And you love them anyway. It's a way to learn to love yourself at those moments too, I think.
To me, right, what you're saying is very much a relatable, universal human experience. How have others perceived it? And as you contextualized at the beginning around the challenges that we're facing in various parts of, you know, in various communities across the US, I don't even think it's place-based, right? But various communities across the US. What has your experience been with this push for book bans,
Oh, yeah.
censorship, and how have you been having those conversations as you've been having, you know, similar conversations like this across the country?
Yeah, well, it's challenging. I was just, and as library students, I have to say to you, brace yourself. You're going to need your strength, because it's a tough situation out there right now. It's okay. I have in Florida, Clay County, Florida, for example, just removed Yaqui Delgado Wants to Kick Your Ass from the public libraries and from the school libraries. It's been challenged in Virginia and a bunch of places. And half the time I don't even know. I have to hear, somebody has to report to me that the book has been challenged. Sometimes I don't know. And then there's this whole area of soft censorship, which sometimes happens at the hands of frightened librarians. So this is what that looks like. The child has to come to the library with a note from home to take out Yaqui, right? Or burn or something like that. Or the books are kept in a very special section for mature readers, or however the librarian is sort of thinking about that. And I understand how that would happen in a climate where a principal, a PTA, a community can make your life miserable and come out after you with really alarming accusations that you're grooming children, that you're hurting children, that you are, you know, having all of these really terrible goals in mind with what you're doing. It's hard for me right now as ambassador, because I have to be very even-handed. It's a nonpartisan role. I have decided that it is vital for me to keep people at the table in conversation. And so what I am constantly telling parents and groups that want to ban or pull my books because they find the girls vulgar or whatever it is that they dislike about the book, that I think the most powerful position to be in is, especially with teenagers, is to be in conversation with them about everything about them, really, about what they're reading, what they're doing, to be in conversation. once we start dropping obstacles in, I think what we do is alienate them and push them to secrecy, which is, of course, our chief challenge sometimes with teens. And the other part is that it undermines this group of people who've studied for years, right? Children's literature and child psychology and how to make selections. It undermines that professionalism. So that's the conversation I've been having. But it is often, there's a lot of pushback into anything that has to do with girls' sexuality, culture increasingly, any kind of cultural content, again, the whole anti-American thing. But nothing is quite under fire as much as LGBTQ theme in literature. They by far, I think, are facing the worst sort of pushback.
What are some of the effective responses?
Yeah, I think the ALA just came out with book resumes. I don't know if you're following that. So books are challenged all over the country, but if you go on ALA's page, you can download the book resume for the different titles that will list what the awards were. It also gives you what the complaint against the book was. It just arms you. It gives you information. I think having a plan and sticking to a plan in a school, having a process by which you can assess a book and decide whether it remains or is removed or whatever, but having a plan. And the plan is not the principal decides or the principal goes into the library and removes the book on the weekend. Those things are helpful. I feel like helping kids activate, knowing their right to read. The National Council Against, the NCAC, National Council Against Censorship, I think, has a really good website and tabs and materials for kids to be able to advocate on their own behalf at school board meetings and in their schools. But it's a collective thing. Maddeningly, a lot of these challenges are being brought forth by a very small group of people, and that just makes you really, really crazy. But yeah, I just think being prepared.
Right. And
How
as the
about you in
author,
DC with the Board of Ed? How does that work for you guys? What have you found that has been effective for you?
So we in DC have 4 student representatives on the Board of Ed, and they are incredibly inspiring. I find so much of our ability to actually respond to these kinds of efforts, which we also see in DC. Often it's our student reps who are at the front line, the first to say, this is not who we are as a city. And it actually is so much more meaningful coming from them.
Young people, yeah.
And so I have found them to be really the champions for naming, right? If folks come forward saying, this is who we aren't, they're very, very outspoken about, yes, this is who we are.
That's wonderful. That's good to know. I feel the same way when I see students taking the reins, but I feel for them also. I feel like it shouldn't only be on them. It isn't, of course. We're all trying to row in the same direction, but thank goodness for them. Yeah. But it is maddening to watch that weight, watch them have to try to talk sense into this vacuum. Yeah.
And of course, the school librarians, right, who I think actually very much take an approach that's similar to the way that you're describing how you write the texts, to be able to have those conversations with their students around difference and focus in on the characters, right? And focus in on the stories and the adventures as the way to actually build those bridges, right? And not necessarily, it doesn't have to be so explicitly about a certain, right? Your texts are not a, this is what a Tia does.
Right, right. This is what this Tia is doing this day.
Right.
Yeah, which is probably similar to your Tia. Wendy Chang and I had this conversation one day. We were talking about Vicks Vapo Rub. So did any of you use Vicks Vapo Rub when you're sick? Okay, me too. So Cuban mothers, that is the cure-all. Forget antibiotics, anything like that. What you need is a lot of Vicks Vapo Rub on your feet and very thick socks on top of it. And so that cures virtually everything. And Wendy Chang looked at me and she said, but wait a minute, I'm Chinese and we use Vicks Vapor Rub in exactly the same way. I said, you see, there are some universals here. So those are that's such a silly example, but there it is, right? Like all of the different ways that we come together on these things.
And now I'm going to say, I guess it's not a Chinese thing or Taiwanese thing, that my family does something quite stinkier, which is that the cure-all is garlic.
What do you do?
Eat lots of raw garlic.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Well, you do not want to be around us
No.
when we are sick.
No, not when you're sick, for sure.
And earlier I shared a bit about how I think about the definition of literacy.
Yes.
I would love to hear yours.
I don't know, it is evolving, right? Because when many years ago, I was a teacher. And so my very first notion was reading and writing. Like, do they understand how a book works, right? How you turn the pages? Can they read the picture? Can they, the simple things. And as time has gone on, like this notion of all kinds of literacies, right? Mathematical literacies, financial literacies, media literacy, increasingly today. So it's an ever expanding notion. What concerns me sometimes right now, and you and I have had like talks about that, like I go back and forth, the pendulum swings on how we teach reading and how we teach literacy. I do worry sometimes that we swing too much into, this is exactly how we will do it in this specific way, because I just don't think human beings are built that way. I just think that we learn and we expand and we grow our knowledge and our skills in lots of different ways. So I don't know, the science of reading, just the phrase sometimes scares me. I don't know, what are your thoughts about it? We've had lots of conversation about this.
Let's go there.
Yes, let's go there. Let's dig in.
So, I think that deep down, right, we do not naturally learn how to read, right? It's not something that we have evolved as a skill necessarily. It's not built into the way that our ancestors have evolved. Language, oral language, yes, right? Written text is not something that is, and I'll go back to some of the neurological work that I find fascinating, right, around the reading brain. It's not one pathway, right, or one part of your brain that lights up that's like the reading part of your brain, right? And so for all of us, it is the exercise of how you build those pathways to be able to read. And you're right, I think how we actually go about building out those skills is quite different, because it is not something that is so clearly already drawn out as a path neurologically, right? And so when I think about how we actually teach reading, right, I think of the importance of the context in which we are learning it, right? And how different it is for a teacher whose students have a lot of texts at home, have parents who are reading to them at night, go to the library, versus someone who doesn't have that kind of environment to grow up in. And I think of the difference also between how do we think about, well, how we measure it, right? So at least in the US, across the US, we're so dependent on NAEP test scores, right, in 4th grade and 8th grade. And how we assess that actually makes a huge, it very much is telling us what are we actually valuing in the way that we define literacy, right? And what we'll see over and over again, and I think this is part of a piece of what you're saying, is there's a lot of the science of reading work that shows that it backs up 4th grade reading outcomes, right, with a very explicit phonic instruction. What we see is, unfortunately, that just because you can sound out the text does not mean that you then become very good at passing the 8th grade test, which relies much more on comprehension and understanding, and a lot of that relies on what cultural knowledge do you know, what vocabulary do you understand, and you know, I'll tell this one anecdote because I think it is such a problem, right? That we had a student who didn't understand, you know, 10 blocks from the Capitol that I was speaking to, who didn't understand that the Capitol with a capital C was the institution and not what is the capital of a state, right? And sure, the spelling is different. The rest of the text doesn't make any sense. That student is not going to, you know, check the right answer in the multiple choice, right? And so we get to a point where a lot of that knowledge makes a huge difference. And how do we actually develop that knowledge base?
Oh, I have some thoughts.
Yes.
So Naval Caroni has a new book called Nourishing Caretaker Collaborations, if you have a chance to look at it. So her basic premise is like, there's a lot of literacy expertise at home that is untapped. So what she's saying is your parents had a lot of literacy expertise that perhaps was not tapped, right? My mother did too. So my mother couldn't have told you what the Newbery was for sure. My mother did not know about the canon of American children's literature. That was not something she did. When I was little though, my mother would stand in the apartment doing whatever, and she'd recite José Martí's poem from La Edad de Oro, and she would recite these whole sections, and she would say to me, you know, my father and I would go to the park on Sundays, and he would stand me up, and I could recite this whole stanza, and I was thinking, a girl in Queens, what a bunch of fruitcakes these people were. What are you kidding? Like, what are you doing? But like this notion that my mother would be standing somewhere reciting poetry in the park. And then she bought me that book in Spanish, and she read it to me, and we did get the World Book Encyclopedia, but there were endless stories about Cuba and mangoes and how sugarcane is processed and what the town was like, you know what I'm, like all these cultural pieces of expertise, right, that she had, that she could give me. And so Naval's book is really an examination of how can we do that as librarians, as teachers, as moms and dads? How can we bring families into a sense of comfort in their own expertise and bring it into libraries and into classrooms? It's really a fascinating book. I'm going to be speaking with her at MLK Library in April, so be on the lookout, and she'll be discussing this book. I'll be you, like in that conversation. I'll be asking her the question. But I think that is an untapped resource. And that is another thing that I'm doing a lot of talking to parents about, feeling more confident in what they have to offer.
What are some of the responses that those parents?
Well, it's a tough climb, right? And you know, some parents are just feeling like this is not a space for me.
Yeah.
I can't communicate with you. This is an official space. I'm not an official person, quote, right? That kind of thing. But I think steady, continual outreach and connection and programs and invitations and recipes are reading and a map of what your town looked like is a map also, et cetera. Those kinds of things, inviting and giving legitimacy to what that experience is. Because that was the other thing about growing up biculturally. It can mess with the power dynamic or the dynamic in the family. Because suddenly you're 10, but you have all the expertise that has street value, right? And it warps something. It warps something in the family as well. So retaining some of that expertise and knowledge and stature, that the parents have to offer their child. I think it's important to set the parent up in that way versus the parent being something that the kid has to get around to be successful.
And as you have been working towards different methods of engaging families, what have you found to be let's start with the ways that haven't worked out well, and I'd love to hear the ways that have.
I mean, I make tons of mistakes. So one way that doesn't work out is just having an event and putting flyers out and inviting people. No, no one will come. I'll save you the trouble. That does not really work. So that is an active sort of thing. Activities that feel safe to bring children of all ages, like the whole family too, is important. Activities where the child is participating in some way with the parent. Together we are going to do this. We're going to do a demonstration of how to make a tamal. Or whatever, like those kinds of things. We're going to be the expert together. I have found those to be effective. Having librarians that are multilingual, bilingual, having all of those kinds of things. And I have to say, having books in, say, laundromats, which is, I want to confess to the whole country here that I have a love for laundromats. I don't know why. It's like the smell of them, I think, like the detergent-y kind of thing, and the hum of the machine, and the anonymity of it somehow, and just Queens. It just brings me back to the person I feel like I was. Like, there's something about it that just transports me back. And so I love laundromats. And so when I found out, Allister, that you have a whole literacy thing going on in laundromats, I was thinking, we're made. So I want to hear all about this. Tell us more.
So I had the opportunity now 9 years ago to do outreach programming with a branch of the New York Public Library in the South Bronx, where we found that when we ran the same literacy programs in a laundromat in the community, we had 8 times the retention and completion rate for that multi-week program, right? Because the scarcest resource for everyone at the end of the day is time. And the scheduling barriers to actually get to the library at an exact time every single week was actually the hardest thing for most families to be able to commit to. And so I've been obsessed with laundromats since and spend most of my waking days in laundromats. And
I bet you have good folding skills at this point. I just, okay. So that's wonderful. So what's in there? Like you staff it with, tell me the particulars.
Yeah. Well, we're hiring, so.
Wait. I might be applying at the end of my tenure. Okay, go ahead, more.
So I joke that there are 999 bad ways to approach people in these kinds of contexts, right? Where it's not in the formal setting, right? Of
Right.
we have a role. No one is walking into the laundromat looking for me if they haven't met me yet, right? Or my team. And so our goal is really to build a relationship so that we can actually have the conversations that can build on one another week after week. And so the goal is to get to all 30,000 laundromats across the US, but really in a way that's not a pop-up, right? Embedded in the spaces. You see me there every week.
Yeah.
That's the best way to actually create some of these movements that I think you're
Seeing a
naming.
book dispenser, I'm just seeing it. I don't know. There's, it'd be wonderful. I did go to a public school that had a book dispenser. Yeah. I'm not sure, I don't remember the particulars of who got to, what I remember what I didn't love about it, it was like a reward system. You had to be a special kid who got some sort of blue chip that got put into that machine. But I mean, you had to see their faces were like pressed up against that glass as the arm was going, and the book drops. It was just, there's something about the drama of that moment that feels good.
So we're on the same page about laundromats mattering.
Yes.
What about books? Do books, physical books, do they still matter?
Oh my, well, to me for sure, but yes, yes, yes. Although I'm also gonna say, I'm not opposed to audiobooks at all. And I feel like, for people in busy lives, right? We walk, we're running, we're driving places. We need to consume story. I do. I have to read a lot, and you are going to for sure to try to keep up, because you're going to always face that moment when someone says to you, "Have you read such and such book?" and you haven't, and you're going to feel terrible, right? That happens to me all the time, and I have this running list of the next book I have to get to. But I like audiobooks as a way to connect story. So that little gap you're talking about from 4th grade to 8th grade, right? Like, so story, motivation, being able to be with your kid in a car and say, "Oh my gosh, did you hear what that character did? What do you think? Why was he doing that?" And, your kid might give you a one-word answer, or might say, "Well, because," fill in the blank, gold nugget moment right there, that you're building literacy. So do books matter? Yeah. I feel like knowing, especially nonfiction as well. I want to really give a huge plug to nonfiction, because we do a great job, I think, in teaching circles to really support fiction as a way to create like book clubs and things like that. But there are always kids in the class who like to know stuff. And we need to build libraries that also have a robust, interesting nonfiction collection. One of my favorite books to book talk as the national ambassador is this book called Whale Fall. It's a picture book by Melissa Stewart. And I always start with the kids. I say, a whale is the size of 3 city buses. It weighs more than 65 cars together. What happens when something that size dies in the ocean? It sinks and sinks and sinks and sinks until it reaches the abyss, where there is no light, and where for 70 years it will feed other things in the sea. And they're like, "What's eating it?" And I say, "Everything eats it. Octopuses, crabs. There's even something that breathes through its buttocks." I'm not kidding. And all of this is in the glossary of this picture book. It's a fabulous book. And it's a picture book that everyone can read. The 8th grader can read it, the 5-year-old can read it, the teenager can read it. It's an everybody book, so to speak. So yeah, Yes, they matter. Knowing matters. Ideas matter. Being able to hold opposing ideas matters. Being able to have an idea and continue to be in conversation and community and relationship with someone who has a different idea. All of that matters. And I think books are our best hope to make that a part of daily life with the kids. Yeah.
So then what are the opportunities and challenges that technology provides us now?
Well, you know, screen time is really addicting and it's easy, right? And I think it uses a different part of the brain. And we have learned to use screen as babysitter. Go anywhere, you'll see people who are, you know, with their children, they're on their phone pushing the stroller, like as opposed to interacting with their children. So there's all of those levels. But again, I still think that we can be smart and make screen a friend to reading, right? One of my favorite thing at the Newbery Library in New York was that you could take out all of these, you know, you could take out ebooks, you could take out movies of books, like all of these connections. So it doesn't have to be an either or. It can be together. And I think we probably have questions coming in the chat or not, and I am armed with the catch box. I haven't forgotten. This has been very handy for, I'm a hand talker, so this has kept me still. I've been appreciated. And I wanted to show you, I have a picture book coming out in September, and I made a trailer. Would you like to see it? It's just a minute. So I'm going to show you. It's called No More Señora Mimi. And what I'm going to tell you is that when I was young, my mother worked in a factory, and the lady who took care of me was named Mimi. And the day my mother came to me and she said, Mira, your family is coming from Cuba, and so Abuela's going to be your babysitter now. I was delighted. I went to Mimi and I fired her. I was 5. So this book is set sort of, this Mimi doesn't look anything like the real Mimi, but it started with that moment of how is it that we love people and open our hearts to new people, and who loves us as children. So here it is. So what I want to tell you about this is that this is a story that is very set culturally specifically. Many Latina women serve as caretakers for people's children. Many Latina women work and need to find caretakers. So there's that whole piece. And the other thing, more fun for you, is that the illustrator, Brittany Chickasee, I keep saying Chickasee because I want to say it like that because it's Italian, but it's Chickasee, is a librarian. Yeah. So I love that. I love that she's a librarian, and she did a beautiful job. So.
Beautiful.
Yes. So do we have, oh my goodness. Yes, I'm looking at all the questions. Oh, I can see them right here. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we've been having a delightful conversation in the chat.
Yes.
While you've been talking, what a lovely bunch from all over that we have gathered here today. If anyone in the Zoom has questions, please feel free to pop those in the chat. And otherwise, we'd love to take a couple questions from the room, if anyone in the room has any questions.
Bring in the mic.
So given, when I was growing up, the only way to find a book that you weren't supposed to have was to find it through some nefarious means. With kids today, everybody's got the internet. How censorship on the internet doesn't work except in certain countries. How is that as much of a problem, censoring books from kids, or can they get stuff through other means?
I think the problem that I have is when a school officially removes it or a public library removes it. I have a problem with the stigmatization, like stigmatizing a book as dangerous. I think possibly the kids they can sneak and go on Amazon. They could go to a bookstore and get it. And many people will say, so is that really censorship? Because you could still get the book somewhere. But the larger question is that you're stigmatizing and you're creating a barrier in the most natural place where the child ought to be able to freely get that book and engage with that book. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
I think of the librarian's role, right, as if one layer zoomed out, that by the time you know what question to ask and type into Google, or the book you're looking for, and you type that into Google, I think you're 90% of the way there. I think the challenge is how do you come up with that question that you don't know you even need to ask? Or how do you even know that this book exists to look for, right, is actually a much harder step. Then you're right. By the time if there's a book that I really want to read as a kid, of course I can find it online, right? But how do I know that that is something that I have as an option to read it all?
And also broadening the palette, right? Just broadening people's exposure to all different kinds of genres and authors and so on. I think this is where you come in. That's your vital role. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah. Oh, I'm going to go around the room counterclockwise.
Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. My name is Meg Medina, and I'm a professor here at the iSchool. I actually teach in the MLIS program. And my research is I study how young adults use libraries for the development of emerging digital literacies. And you touched upon this a little bit. So one of the projects that I'm currently doing is we are trying to make every Marylander digitally literate. And one of the things that we are finding is basic literacy is a precursor to becoming digitally literate. In order for you to learn how to use your Chromebook, you need to know how to read the manuals, the assistance, the tutorials, right? It is possible you can watch videos and figure out, but you still need to read all the comments or the commands that you need to in order to be able to operate the Chromebook, right? So I was just curious about your thoughts because you did touch upon other types of literacies, right? But we find in our work that basic literacy is precursor to learning other types of literacies. How do you find cues of misinformation if you can't really read them, right? So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
So my thoughts on the need to have like basic reading skills to enable other literacies. That's the question. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think that we do need, there's no scenario where I would say to you not being able to decode, right? And understand words and sentences, or being able to read is not helpful. So for sure, I think that's a good basic, a beginning. But it's not the only literacy that kids need now, is what I'm finding. That they do need to be financially literate. They do need to have really good skills increasingly in how they navigate media to separate what's fraudulent, what's real, all of those things. I just feel like it's an ever expanding box of literacies. It's not just one thing. And when I was younger, literacy was really just about, can she read that sentence? So, you proud? Yes? Okay.
Wonderful. Okay, couple more questions. I'm going to read one from, I'm going to combine two questions from online since we are running low on time for questions. How do you decide where to go on your visits to libraries and children and families? And what has surprised you the most in your travels?
So the ambassadorship is supported by three things: by the Library of Congress, by the Children's Book Council, Every Child a Reader, and by my publisher. So the Library of Congress handles like my office hours and my inauguration and that, but Every Child a Reader organizes the book tour. So schools apply, and at the front end, they asked me, what are you looking for? And what I was looking for was I centered libraries in my ambassadorship. So I wanted to go places where the school library and the public library in a community were figuring out ways to work together and not as separate silos. So when those applications come in, Every Child a Reader, and they're very extensive, like they ask all kinds of questions. Every Child a Reader narrows it down to from, let's say, 150 applications to the top 5 or 6. I'm given those, and then I select the one. They also give me a map, so it's sort of like, where's Waldo? Where have I been and where haven't I been, right? So if there are pockets of the country where I haven't been, I try to find a place to go there. So that's how I'm going to New Hampshire. And later, I'm going to LA, New Hampshire. I've been to Nashville. I was in Lake Charles, Louisiana. So they try to get a full representation across the country. What has been the most surprising about the ambassador role, I would say, is just, it's exhausting. It's a really, really exhausting experience, and it's all consuming. So Jason Reynolds, when he passed the baton to me, said to me, this is not like the Newbery. It's not, you're not going to get a medal that you're going to put somewhere and be proud of. You have just signed up for a job. And boy, was he right. It is, you quiet your own career for 2 years, and you really focus on the reading lives of children and talking about books written by other people for them. So that, I just didn't realize how tired I would be. But I am, and I love it. And I would also say that my closing ceremony is December 16th, and I will be very sad on that day because I have really loved serving this country in this way. It has been really meaningful to me. Yeah. And I just think of being first generation, it feels especially poignant to me.
Yeah. Hi, Meg, thank you so much. I'm Victoria Van Heining, also an assistant professor here at the University of Maryland, working on the MLIS program, and formerly of the Library of Congress. So shout out to colleagues on the Zoom, and thank you for your work. I have been working with the American Library Association to rewrite the standards for people who are incarcerated, detained in jails, detention centers, and the library services that they should have access to. And we've talked in those standards a lot about the problems of censorship. And so elements of what you said today very much touch on that, and thank you for talking about that. But I also wonder if you could share any thoughts about reaching people who may have a primary caretaker or family member who is incarcerated or who themselves have been justice involved or in the juvenile system. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like removing shame is a really key part of that for kids. There have been, but I know Jackie Woodson has a book, but there are others. There are several other authors who've written books that feature characters whose parents or brothers or sisters are incarcerated. I feel like those representations really matter for all kids to see, but most certainly kids who are in that situation. Shame is a lot to drag around as a child, and it's one of these, it has so many tendrils and they wrap around you, and it creates so many unintended and terrible consequences. So just access to that and removal of shame and not whispering about this as though it never happens. You know, I just finished reading Gather, which was a National Book Award finalist in the youth category. It's by a principal. He is an assistant principal or a principal. I want to say it's set in Maine or in New Hampshire, and the young man's mom is in and out of facilities, and she has a drug problem. That story needs to live in a library, needs to be read and to be discussed. Many children in this country live in families where this is an issue. And that's really just what I would say. There's no experience that I feel like we should hide or put away. If it's human and if it's happening, there's no reason that we can't read about it and trust children to be able to think and have conversations about it. What do you think? Yeah? Okay.
More academic
They're like, who's
responses,
wrapping up? Okay.
I think of actually you're probably aware of this, but IFLA and UNESCO's work with prison and jail libraries, they've been gathering those examples from around the world, right? And it's much more technical. I love Meg's answer. It's very inspiring. I think Lisa Krolak's work around this, collecting kind of best practices of how jails and prisons do this work in a more tactical way is the other side of what I think Meg said very eloquently.
All right, we're going to stop here and give Meg a chance to enjoy her own reception before we put her back to work signing books for us. So for those in the room, please join us across the concourse for the reception. Thank you so much for such an inspiring conversation. Thank you.